All right, thank you everybody for coming. If anyone else joins, they can catch up, I'm sure. Um, so today for our Cord Connects meeting, I'm William Dixon. I'm one of the Cord Connects chairs this year. Dr. Danielle Miller is joining us for a lecture on maximizing scholarship, which is going to be awesome. Dr. Danielle Miller is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and affiliated with the Denver Health Residency in emergency medicine. She completed a fellowship in medical education scholarship at Stanford, where we were actually co-residents. And she has a master of medical education, or sorry, co-fellows, a master's of medical education from the University of Cincinnati. In her roles at University of Colorado, she is the Associate Med Ed Fellowship Director, Director of the Alpine Medical Education Curriculum for medical students, and is a grant-funded researcher in integrating technology into competency-based med ed assessment programs. Thank you for being here, Danielle.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. Pleasure to be here. And so let us get started. So as Will said, I think all of us have the stress of trying to maximize scholarship in our career. And so I've had a lot of hard lessons learned and good lessons learned. And so I thought I'd share with you today. And then feel free to put any tips and tricks you have in the chat because I always love to learn more ways that you have maximized your scholarship. And so I think at the start of every sort of session, I ask like why do we care? So like why do we care about maximizing scholarship, right? You all are doing cool and interesting things. The way you sort of tell people about these interesting things is scholarship. And you are not only telling sort of the world, but also your department and institutions. And this is how you get promoted. So this is just a group reflection. Reflect internally. You don't have to write anything or call out your answers, but how much do you know about your promotion pathway and how much does scholarship play a role? Because this does vary at different institutions. And knowing sort of the rules of the promotion game and what counts towards scholarship can really help direct how you maximize your scholarship, which gets us into how can we maximize scholarship. And so our goal and objectives are for today. So by the end of this presentation, participants will be able to define digital scholarship as a way to maximize scholarship and sort of identify ways to implement digital scholarship into your career to maximize and how to cite those for promotion. And lastly, just describe some pragmatic strategies to maximize sort of traditional scholarship. And so let's get started with our first objective, which is defining digital scholarship. And so traditionally, when we think of scholarship, we think of sort of peer-reviewed original research or case reports, textbooks, abstracts, etc. But digital scholarship has emerged, including sort of digital publications, peer-reviewed blogs, podcasts, and it's just being utilized more frequently, especially for medical education scholarship. Traditionally, when we think of the process of scholarship, as starting with like research or a curriculum idea, and then you perform your literature search or background reviewed, and then you perform your data collection or your curriculum implementation, and finally you go into like writing the manuscript for publication and then using that for like promotion. I want you to think though about potentially integrating like digital scholarship as a way to maximize scholarship at the beginning and end of this process. So right after you've completed your sort of extensive literature search, and also right after you've completed your manuscript writing, because this is a way that you could potentially reach like more people. And we know this research process sometimes takes a year or two, and you have all this like really great scholarship potential that you can do sort of in that 2-year process. And so I just want to advocate for digital scholarship because it can reach a large number of physicians and trainees. I mean, how many people are actually going to find your actual research article deep in that journal? And so you may actually be missing a large number of physicians and trainees who sort of need experts in the topic that you're creating your research in. And so maybe digital scholarship will be an avenue to kill two birds with one stone, like, get a publication and sort of reach people more broadly than your journal article. So let's take a step back and sort of define scholarship. So in the 1990s, Boyer articulated how we should consider scholarship in modern academics. And so he added to this pie of traditional scholarship here and sort of focused on like 4 broad categories of scholarship. And so that's the scholarship of discovery, or sort of your like bench research, the scholarship of teaching, which is what we think of educational research and innovations, and the scholarship of integration, and then the scholarship of application, which is clinical research or implementation science. But digital scholarship can like fit into this Boyer model, and it's part of the scholarship pie. And it's really just defined as any sort of original content that is disseminated digitally. So it can include things like smartphone applications, blogs, commentaries, podcasts, instructional videos, web-based learning modules, online courses, websites, serious gaming, or social networking. And so the natural question is like, can I use digital scholarship for promotion? So yes, digital scholarship can and should be used for promotion. So in 2019, consensus guidelines for the evaluation and promotion of digital scholarship were developed by a core consensus conference. And this is a really high yield article. So if you ever want to look it up, just type in core consensus on digital scholarship. And these guidelines provide guidance to like promotion and tenure committees on metrics to evaluate significant scholarly contributions, such as like impact and role, and like quality. So if you like get into this, right, how are you going to define your impacts? Think about things like page views and likes or impressions, your role sort of plays into like how you can use this for promotion. So an author is very different than an editor. And then quality, right? We've developed like a bunch of scores to rate the quality of your article. And so they give guidance there. And everyone is doing digital scholarship. Again, this is old at this point as it's only showing up to 2012. But people are just increasingly publishing this. And so practically, starting digital scholarship can be quite helpful. So this brings me to sort of part two of my session, and this is just practical tips on how to implement digital scholarship into your career. I'm going to provide you with numerous like resources and tips, and also like personal examples of how I've published in some of these arenas, just to give you an idea that like this is very anyone can do this, and so again, throughout this part, if you have any like success stories or tips, feel free to add to the chat. And so we're first going to start about commentaries. So commentaries are like a great form of digital scholarship that you can like easily incorporate into your publishing career, and kind of quite honestly traverse the line of both like digital and physical scholarship. So from ASAP Now to SA Impulse to EM Residence, there's multiple arenas to publish commentaries. And commentaries are a great way to write on topics in your expertise. So you've already performed like a background literature search on your current research project, or you've done a deep dive into some learning theory for your curriculum that you're implementing, to like use that for a commentary. So for example, early on in my career, I did a lot more research in like gender disparities, in assessment of trainees. And so I submitted an SA Impulse commentary on mitigating bias in trainee evaluations like prior to the slow season. And so, right, I had all this background literature on mitigating or on gender bias and how we can mitigate that, for research studies that we're doing like natural language processing for the slow. And so I just sort of converted that into like, what have I learned from all that literature and how we could mitigate this to reach a sort of broader audience. And then additionally, another like early and easy like publication win was when I was a resident. EM resident always was asking for residents to write articles. And so at that time, I was really interested in doing sort of using the angiocath and like central line placement. And so, or the needle over the catheter for that. And so I had written an article with one of the attendings at demonstrating how to do the needle over the catheter approach in central lines. And so if you flip that, if you're faculty, combining your expertise with an area of interest for your resident, you can also get publications in these sort of commentaries. So actually, how do you actually like submit a commentary? Oftentimes the website really just includes an easy way to to submit. So for example, SA Impulse, will we say like write for SA Impulse? or they might say something like contribute to EM Resident Magazine. And so really just thinking about, again, using commentaries as a way to sort of promote your research and topic expertise. Another avenue to implement digital scholarship in your careers is through blogs. As stated prior, you've probably already performed a background literature search on your current research project or curriculum topic. And so use that for a blog. Moreover, it really might be imperative that you blog. We know that like many trainees turn to blogs and FOMED for information, and we actually like need experts writing digestible posts that have pertinent and quick and accurate information. And so again, consider blogging as a way to promote your expertise and get accurate information out there. And so there are tons of blogs. This is not exhaustive, but again, like many avenues for whatever you want to blog about in EM or med ed. And so my personal example of this was I had gotten I was really interested in doing a research project on core and trustable professional activity, specifically 10, which is the ability of a medical student to recognize and initiate care of a patient with an emergent condition. I had submitted like an elaborate grant to SAM EMF. And while waiting to hear back from that grant, I'm like, I wonder if like the average physician actually knows about entrustment and what's the difference between an OPA, an EPA, and a milestone. And so I co-wrote this with one of my fellows at Stanford at the time, and just sort of described like what is entrustment and how are these various terms different. And so it's pretty, again, easy to submit a blog post. Just go onto the blog. There's usually a page that's like submit a post. Sometimes you have to sort of like pitch your idea, like with EM Docs. So you might have to like email the editor and say, I'm thinking about doing this. Or you may have to just reach out to like the contact director, like in Skeptic's Guide to Emergency Medicine. What are other practical tips for blogging? So there are hundreds of blogs out there. So selecting a blog is really like selecting a journal. So I suggest just like picking a blog that you regularly read and submitting to their content, as you likely are more familiar with like the writing format and style and general content that's published. Obviously, like format the post correctly. This is like publishing 101, like follow the rules. And then a catchy title can help. So like the one I showed you from mine, like, can the trainee be trusted? Yes, that was clickbait, but also makes for like a kind of fun blog post. Another way to sort of implement digital scholarship, we've talked about commentaries and then blogs, are innovations. So this, like ALM has a idea series where you can publish your innovations and ideas. So you can see from like, this was a shot from a while ago, but like, you can see like in this idea series, it's handheld ultrasounds for emergency residents rotating on cardiology, or here was a 3D printed pediatric lumbar procedure, our LP trainer. And innovations are great because again, they also sort of traverse traditional and digital scholarship. But say you don't have like a bunch of data because you haven't piloted your 3D printed pediatric lumbar puncture trainer. This is a great way to like publish like your idea, and you've created something really cool and can share that with your community, but you are still working on gathering all the data for, you know, validity of your 3D printed pediatric lumbar puncture trainer. So for example, a colleague of mine created this like chest wall model for an ultrasound guided serratus anterior plane block. She ended up just publishing this article, but actually like her describing how she made that model would have been like a great like innovation or idea series post, and again would be another form of scholarship. And then another way to implement digital scholarships into your career is like podcasting. And again, there's so many podcasts. You can really like, when I think about like podcasting, again, I'm not a huge podcaster, but I've been actually involved in like writing scripts of podcasts because I generally do not like to be an interviewer or an interviewee. So think about it in that way. If you're like, hey, I might not be the person creating the podcast or being the interviewed person on a podcast, think about, you could also really like participate in making like scripts. And so these are, again, there's the national organizations such as ASAP and SAM also have podcasts you can participate in. And then there is this podcast on like How Do I Podcast series. This is by Dr. Benjamin Azan. This is on academic life and emergency medicine. And I like it because it sort of breaks up how to make a podcast into like, what is the technology you need to create a podcast, how to create the podcast, and then just like pearls and pitfalls. All right. And then there are other forms of digital scholarships. So think about things like apps, modules, websites, videos, MOOC development. Remember, you can cite these in your CV and promotion packet. And so again, a little group reflection. If you can think of any other ways you've maximized digital scholarships or pearls and pitfalls, feel free to share in the chat. Back to promotion. So like, how am I going to cite these metrics? And so let's look at that. So again, going back to the article we had referenced earlier, we're going to talk about sort of the impact, your role, and quality. And so again, if it was like I wrote a blog post, you might just cite like the page views of that. But if you say, hey, I've become the curator of a significant, a blog, then again, describing that role is really important. And then the paper also gets into like what would be considered low impact, medium impact, and high impact. So again, you can sort of outline this for your promotions and tenure committee, but like say you're an author of a blog post with more than 3,000 views, that still might be considered low impact compared to someone with like 7,500 views. All right. So again, here's the reference to that article. So lastly, I'm just going to describe some pragmatic strategies to maximizing traditional scholarship. And some of these will seem familiar to you, but I would call this like other strategy one, like just asking yourself, like, can my early research project be converted into a national or international presentation? And so that would be like, can I turn my literature review for my current research project into a national or international presentation? So for example, this is like the final published article, but I was really interested in like how we could use like physical and biophysical markers of assessment in medical training. So like, how have people been using like heart rate monitors and visual attention glasses and fMRI and FNIRS? How has that been used in assessment of our medical trainees? And so I was leading this huge scoping review in the literature, and right, the scoping review process can be very laborious. I was like 6,000 articles and 443 med inclusion. So it took like 2 years to get through this. But from reading a bunch of articles, and before we were in true publication stage, right, we had a really good grasp of like how medical trainees were being evaluated with this technology or assessed with this technology, and sort of how the technology itself worked. And so we turned that into an SAM presentation where we're like, here's how FNIRS work, and in general, like how are trainees being assessed? What are the most high yield papers in this arena? And so just asking yourself, when you're doing all this work for these other projects, can I turn this into a presentation, even if I haven't gotten all my data collected yet? And then obviously every time, when it hits like a certain time of year, you're always like, can I turn my research results into an abstract for CORD or for SAM or ASAP? And so remember, if you have early research results, can that abstract be submitted to national or international conferences? Again, maximizing your scholarship. Other strategy too is just like, can my presentation at a national conference, so it's like the vice versa, be turned into a paper? And so this past SAM, I was in a collaboration with these folks on the screen about doing this panel on a crash course in the journal landscape, where should you submit your next medical education project. And it was a really fun, engaging session. We put a ton of work into it. And then we thought, like we reached like the 40 people in the room who attended the session, but wouldn't this be great potentially as like traditional scholarship? And so this is accepted in press, but we have this like practical guide to peer review for medical educators. So remember that oftentimes those like collaborations at national conferences can be converted into other formal scholarship. Other strategy 3 is just like, can I find other collaborators and maximize my scholarship? And so this is, I recently like had created this dashboard at University of Colorado's for patient care metrics to sort of assess our residents. And I, through the grapevine, you know, just asking people, do you have dashboards? Sort of found other collaborators doing similar dashboarding at other institutions, right? And by finding these collaborators at Stanford and Wisconsin and NYU and VCU, we decided all to come together and say, hey, like, should we do traditional scholarship on what is the landscape of resident clinical dashboards right now? And so again, this is accepted in press, but collaborations can also maximize your scholarship. And this other strategy 4 is just, can I turn my medical education research skills to collaborate and author on other projects? And so remember, like, if you have some expertise in education, like other folks in your department actually will want to collaborate with you, and it could be helpful for you too. And so thinking about like, hey, can I be a content matter expert? So for instance, like EMS, the EMS team here has taken on a bunch of new agencies. They really want to incorporate point of care ultrasound into field assessments for the medics. And so they approached me and said, hey, like, can you look at how we would like do a pre-survey and an educational intervention and post-survey and potentially get like data skills on our actual data on their skills. And so again, because I have like an education background, this feels like an EMS educational intervention. Again, now you could become a content matter expert on a project where, hey, like I'm not trained in EMS, but I definitely know how to do these sort of education interventions that can help them. It maximizes their scholarship and your scholarship. Similarly, I was approached by a resident who's now a research fellow who really was interested in trauma-informed care and creating consensus on competencies in trauma-informed care. And she's like, I want to do this, I want to do competencies, but I don't know what the framework to use. And so again, if you're someone in education, well, you're like, well, there are 6 core competencies. Let's like couch these all under like medical knowledge and patient care and practice-based learning and improvement, and then sort of help them direct them through the Delphi process. And so again, really, really market yourself as a content matter expert so that you can maximize others' scholarship and your own scholarship. Additionally, you likely have a lot of curriculum design expertise. It's rare to have an educator not like get pulled into a ton of curriculum design interventions. And so again, similar to that EMS example, right, you could help design what the curriculum intervention is for that EMS point of care ultrasound day. And lastly, like the holy grail would be if you could be like a paid consultant, and I've only got to do this once, but if you can like market your sort of education skills to be a paid consultant on a project, again, that maximizes your scholarship, also gets you paid. And so there was a Department of Defense grant that was doing ultrasound in austere environments. And they really just needed help with like designing their assessment tool for that. And so I was paid to help create that tool and again, maximize the scholarship. So got through this relatively quick, but that is fine. So in review, we know that scholarship has evolved and we sort of defined what is digital scholarship. And yes, it can be used for promotion if measured appropriately. We've discussed strategies to incorporate digital scholarship. Don't keep your expertise to yourself, like share it with larger audience via commentaries or blogs, innovations, podcasts. You've already are doing this amazing research. So use it to write a something so you can educate the other folks out there and maximize your scholarship. And then we described sort of pragmatic strategies to maximizing traditional scholarship, whether that's asking yourself, can my research be turned into something, a national presentation right now? Can the national presentation be turned into formal scholarship? or becoming things like a content mentor expert, curriculum design expert, etc. And then remember, again, these processes where you're doing research can take years. And so just think about incorporating scholarships right at the beginning of your research, after you've done your literature search, and actually right after you collected your data, to really get some accurate and meaningful information out there. So finally, again, no session can be super impactful if it doesn't really like change your actions. So if you want to reflect right now, like what project do you currently have that you can maximize and how you could do that? So like for me, I gave a cord lecture like 2 years ago on using the EHR as like a bedside teaching tool, right? That would be amazing, like educational download or something. It's been sitting literally on a folder on my computer to do that project. But maximizing that scholarship, I already did all the work with someone to like create this amazing national presentation. Can I change it into some other form of formal scholarship? All right, and here are my references. I'm going to open it up for any sort of questions or comments. Oh, sorry, Will, I think you're on mute.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Miller. I'm happy to look at the comments if anyone wants to put one in there and read them out. What's been your favorite project?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, it's my current work with all the dashboards, especially because, right, like we're, creating dashboards to look at patient care, in assessment and residence. And so again, this is like why operate in a silo. And so it's been a collaboration within the institution itself of like operations, education, residents, and then finding the other people in the EM community that are doing this. Like I said, Stanford, Wisconsin, VCU, NYU. It's led to more scholarship opportunities and has been a really interesting project on seeing how people are tackling how we can use EHR data in assessment. So
Yeah, I have some interest in that as well. I'm hoping to put together a project soon, which I will
let's
be publishing.
maximize
Maximizing
William.
and
Yeah.
publishing out of it, yeah. All right. Do you find promotion committees look favorably on the non-traditional research and scholarship?
Yeah, so I think you'll have to like ask that like individually for your own committee. So for instance, like at University of Colorado, they are very transparent on like what counts for scholarship, and really like the way we sort of get promoted has to do with like being determined. What they would say, you have to be like meritorious in one of three categories, one being like teaching, one being traditional research, one being like service. And so, and then they get really into the nitty gritty on like, well, what does it mean to be meritorious? And so that could include things in ours. There's explicitly, have you created like online content that has been transformative or has significantly contributed to your to the conversation. And so in that category, right, you could like list all your digital publications. And so I think it's really just like identifying the rules in at your institution and like how it works. So like for instance, if it like your institution traditionally doesn't favor digital scholarship, then like I would focus on the other strategies that we just described later in the presentation, because like you don't want to like waste your time doing all this work for it like not to be appreciated. And so again, just look at the rules on like how you get promoted and sort of strategize a bit of like where are you going to focus your energy, because you can't focus it um, on everything. And so I would say like early in my career, I did way more digital scholarship. Now, like if I have to pick and choose, I'll do more of the latter strategies on like finding collaborators and being a content mentor expert. But it still is important to me to do some forms of digital scholarship because like I said, like I think honestly, they get way more like attention, page views, and it really gets your ideas out there more than someone like diving into medical teacher and finding your scoping review article. So
A lot of the promotion stuff we talk about is like, how are you? Not having been particularly promoted myself yet, although I'm not eligible yet. But a lot of the stuff that I hear is like, it's the local, regional, and national reputation is part of it. And if digital scholarship informs that, I think then it's definitely, it's always worth it, but particularly worth it in that case, I think. What was the Hussein reference for your citations? I don't know if you want to.
oh yeah, I'll put it in there.
Great.
I'm gonna exit out of here for a second.
And then other than that, I think that we can say thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. And I think we have another lecture up in a month, but you guys all have the Cord Connects emails, I'm sure, since you're here. We got it.
Cool.
Thanks to everybody for
Awesome. Thank you
coming.
so much,
Hope you enjoy
William.
your weekend.